This episode is brought to you by Thorne, and I have some incredible news for any of you that are in the military, first responder, or medical professions. In an effort to give back, Thorne is now offering you an ongoing 25% off each and every one of your purchases of their incredible nutritional solutions. Now, Thorne is the official supplement of CrossFit, the UFC, the Mayo Clinic, the Human Performance Project, and multiple special operations organizations. I myself have used them for several years, and that is why I brought them on as a sponsor. Some of my favorite products they have are their Multivitamin Elite, their Whey Protein, the Super EPA, and then most recently, Cinequil. As a firefighter, a stuntman, and a martial artist, I've had my share of brain trauma and sleep deprivation, and Cinequil is their latest brain health supplement. Now, to qualify for the 35% off, go to thorne.com, thorne.com. Click on sign in and then create a new account. You will see the opportunity to register as a first responder or member of military. When you click on that, it will take you through verification with GovX. You'll simply choose a profession, provide one piece of documentation, and then you are verified for life. From that point onwards, you will continue to receive 35% off through Thorne. Now, for those of you who don't qualify, there is still the 10% off using the code BTS10, Behind the Shield 10, for a one-time purchase. Now, to learn more about Thorne, go to episode 323 of the Behind the Shield podcast with Joel Totoro and Wes Barnett. This episode is sponsored by TeamBuildr, yet another company that's doing great things for the first responder community. As a strength and conditioning coach myself who also trains tactical athletes, dissemination of wellness information is one of the biggest challenges. Now, TeamBuildr is the premier strength and conditioning software for tactical athletes, and there are several features that really impress me. Firstly, there is a full exercise library, so you, the personal trainer, does not have to create that within your own department. Secondly, you can send out programming, but also individualize, which I love. So you blanket program for everyone. Now you can tweak based on someone's injury, someone's need to maybe drop some body composition, rather than having to write a program for every single person on their own. TeamBuildr also allows you to build custom questionnaires to collate health and wellness data. It integrates with wearables. And I think one of the most important things is obviously it tracks. To me, it's imperative that we as a profession start tracking our people from day one and then over the full span of their career, therefore catching potential wellness issues and injuries before they happen. Now, if you want to try TeamBuildr, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, a free 14-day trial to experience all of the features. And if you want to take a deeper dive into TeamBuildr, listen to episode 1032 with Melissa Mercado, or go to teambuildr.com. And I'll spell that to you because it's not as you'd think, TeamBuildr.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show former Navy flight surgeon and current president and CMO of Wave Neuroscience, Dr. Erik Won. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into the world of medicine, his perspective of war through a medical lens, working with Boeing, the veteran and first responder mental health crisis, the breakthrough technologies of magnetic E-resonance therapy and synchronized transcranial magnetic stimulation they offer at Wave, how Ohio, Florida, and Missouri offer this technology to their veterans and first responders for free, the application of this technology not only on mental health but also on performance, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,000 episodes now. So, all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So, with that being said, I introduce to you Dr. Erik Won. Enjoy. Well, Erik, I want to start by saying two things. Firstly, thank you to our mutual friend, John Doolittle, for making the connection. And secondly, I want to welcome you onto the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, JD's a very dear friend, and really happy he made the introduction. And of course, the honor's mine to be here. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you.
Absolutely, likewise. Well, we will get to the kind of the fusion, how you met John and what you're doing with his community, and then how that applies to the communities listening. But very first question: where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
I'm in Newport Beach, California. It's nice and sunny outside, and yeah, this has been home for quite a while for me.
Beautiful. My little boy, my son was born in Hoag Hospital, so just down the road from you.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I know it well.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, well then, very first question. Let's go to your origin story. Tell me where you were born, and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was born in Oakland, Alameda Hospital. My dad at the time was getting his PhD at Cal Berkeley. My parents are both first generation Korean American immigrants. Both came over based on academic scholarships. So my dad was a chemist, and my mom got her master's in librarian sciences, and met that way, fell in love. And then I was born at the Oakland Alameda Hospital. We moved down to Orange County afterwards. And growing up, we grew up very much kind of a middle-class family. They're wonderful parents. I think adjusting to life in America, they were coming out of the Korean War. So growing up, my sister and I do have one sibling, an older sister, who I'll get to in a moment, but we were raised very much to have a reverence and respect for what America stood for and the opportunities that were granted. Because many of these things, the poverty that Korea was going through at the time didn't allow for many of the things that we were able to achieve here. And so we worked very hard to honor and respect that opportunity. And my sister, a wonderful human being, she's a cardiothoracic surgeon and specializing in lung transplants, but she retrained in plastics and aesthetics and is now practicing up in Seattle. And so I say half jokingly, I was really kind of the underachiever in the family, but was really appreciative for the opportunities that I had. And so we grew up in Orange County, California, predominantly. And I left for college. I went to University of Notre Dame and had a wonderful experience there. Took a scholarship with the Navy to go to medical school, and enlisted, and did an internship in emergency medicine and they call it a transitional internship. Then did a tour as a flight surgeon with the Marines, which we'll get to, I'm sure, later, but was really a great experience, and to this day, some of my closest friends. And then finished up my medical training in Boston it was a combined program, starting out at Harvard Medical School, then Harvard School of Public Health, and then many of the hospitals there, Mass General, Brigham and Women's, and the Cambridge Health Alliance. Finally ended up back home in California. I was at the Boeing company as their chief physician, and took on a separate role as their chief technology officer, which is how I interfaced with this technology. And joined the company about 8 years ago. It's been really a full sprint ever since.
That's an amazing story for an underachiever. All right, well then I'd love to go back to your parents' immigration because in at certain times in recent history, the immigrant has been tarnished with a lot of negative, connotation. But this is, the tapestry that this country was founded on, over and above, of course, the Native Americans that were already here. And the incredible immigration stories that I've heard, and the power of some of these conflicts that these people were leaving, I think are stories that need to be repeated and need to be heard. So, what have you heard as far as the conditions in Korea, and why your parents decided to move to the U.S., what they were leaving?
Yeah, I always think back to the sacrifices that they made to give their children an opportunity, and yeah, there was quite a bit of hardship at the time, where the separation between North Korea and South Korea, many families ended up getting separated, unfortunately, and that was a little bit of a legacy that whenever I went back to Korea, I'd hear these stories, and it was really only the best students who were able to make it across the ocean to study in the U.S. And so, I just knew them as my parents. But I know when I go back to Korea, they always talk about how hard they worked to get this opportunity and to make good on it. And that, I think, I never felt it as a burden, but I recognized that I was given really a golden opportunity, and I didn't want to waste it. And so all the things you hear about instilling work ethic, and kind of honoring the sacrifices that all of our ancestors made, that kind of gets instilled in you. And I felt very blessed. They gave me great opportunities. It wasn't a traditional Asian family where there's a dragon mom who was kind of crushing me with expectations. It was more of a kind of a healthy household where we were allowed to explore our, academic curiosity and grow at our own pace. I wasn't always a great student, but I did have a natural curiosity. So yeah, my dad sadly passed away about 5 years ago. My mom is still alive, and she lives close to us, and so I get to visit with her quite often. But yeah, very thankful for their journey, and that I was afforded the opportunities that I have here.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing to hear. I just had Dr. Venya on the show, and he is Mexican American, and his father was a mechanic, if I've got this right, in Mexico. Then ended up becoming an engineer in the US, and then his child becomes a neurosurgeon. So, to me, there's some pretty incredible, immigration stories. And again, this is this beautiful tapestry that is the United States. And then also looking at the Korean story, and I've got a veteran coming on soon from that conflict, how close South Korea came to being completely dominated by the North Koreans, and then seeing the impact that the Allies had. I think that's a very undertold story as well. It's the forgotten war, but what those brave men and women of that period did to help, the Korean people at that point, the Southern Korean people, needs to be spoken about more as well, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, and if America is viewed in such a positive light in Korea, even to this day. Now that they've kind of come out of that impoverished state after the war, it's become a fairly affluent country. But still, anything that's American is viewed as a super premium kind of brand, and there's a lot of love for what America did for Korea at a time when they were being oppressed. So yeah, that was definitely part of the Korean story. And when I had the opportunity to give back and join the military, I wasn't sure how my parents would feel about it, but they were very proud. They were excited that we were able to give back in any way. And yeah, and I ended up really enjoying and loving that experience.
It's sad. I think the Korea at the moment, South Korea is going through the most deadly wildfire that they've had in a long, long time. I think they've lost 30 plus people so far.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. And out here in California, of course, the fires that went through, it just seems like these are kind of unusual times. But yeah, definitely saying prayers for our folks in Korea as well.
Absolutely. Well, what about sports and exercise? What were you playing when you were school age?
Oh, yeah, I grew up mostly playing soccer, and then played a little bit of volleyball. It was very popular in Southern California, and then kind of found a niche in track, and was a runner and a jumper, and competed at a reasonable level in high school, and then walked on to the team in college. And I think the coaches may have just been humoring me. My roommate was a thrower, and he had me come with him to practice, and I ran, and the coaches said, well, come back tomorrow. And I kept going for a couple of years. I got to travel with the team, and felt very fortunate to have that opportunity. But there was a day I remember I was feeling pretty good about myself training, got great coaching there, was working out, at the varsity gym. And the day the football players joined the track team, some of your audience may know these names, but Rocket Ismail and Tom Carter, who went on to have great careers in the NFL, came out and they just crushed my PR without any training. They just came out and jumped and beat me by about 3 feet. And so I realized pretty quickly, while this was, I think, fun for me, it certainly was not going to be my future. So I ended up focusing very much on my studies, and gave up my running and jumping career pretty early on.
My son is following the veterinary route at the moment, and he's considering doing the veterinary actual vet school through the military. He's not sure yet. Talk to me about your kind of medical journey and why you chose the military route.
Yeah, it was actually a recruiter that came to our medical school. And I remember listening to them and hearing about the different opportunities that it afforded. And that really appealed to me, that we could have medical school paid for, get our medical training, because many doctors end up graduating from medical school with loans and debt amounting to $250,000 to $500,000. It's just kind of a difficult financial situation to dig yourself out of. And so to be able to have that scholarship, work with the military and lots of other really good men and women seemed interesting to me. And it really was a great experience. I deployed with the Marines. We were HM 268. It's a medium lift rotary wing squadron. And we formed what's called an Marine Expeditionary Unit. So we deployed to the Persian Gulf as the 11th MEU, part of the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. And it's hard to describe, and I think your audience probably understands, but the camaraderie in that unit is something I'll never forget. And, we're all relatively young. Most of the people are going to be between 18 to 30 years old. And you're going to all sorts of foreign countries, sometimes difficult environments, and ultimately, in our case, some combat environments. And part of, I think, the story that's important to mention is our unit had some of the first casualties of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And that was something, of course, that leaves a lasting impact. And so we lost 4 Marines. There were 8 British Special Forces on board. And the residual of that is, the mission changes from operational readiness to making sure the men and women who are grieving, remain kind of in the game, but years afterwards are able to manage. And so the signature injuries of that conflict were traumatic brain injuries. It was a very kinetic conflict, and then post-traumatic stress disorder. And so my experience from the clinical side was we were deploying every modality that we could to try to help, whether it was medication management, cognitive behavioral therapy, eye desensitization. There's many different modalities that we tried, and many were helpful. I'm not here to diminish the value of any of those, but when I came across this technology, which we'll walk through, it's called magnetic EEG guided resonance therapy. It's a form of transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS for short. But what our organization, Wave Neuroscience, is doing is offering a personalization component to it, where we get an EEG brain map, and we look for some disruptions in activity in terms of brain connectivity, and then we administer the transcranial magnetic stimulation in strategic areas to try to restore the disrupted networks. And we found that to be quite effective for PTSD. And we're finishing up an FDA clinical trial. We believe that'll complete this year. And we'll be lobbying the FDA to get a full clearance for that. In the interim, there are some state initiatives where this is being offered to veterans and first responders. And we're allowed to do that through practice of medicine. I should clarify what we're trying to get FDA cleared is an automated protocol generator, which will allow us to scale very rapidly. We currently design these personalized protocols manually through a full service EEG lab we have here in Newport Beach. But these initiatives in Ohio, Missouri, and Florida have gone spectacularly well. And we're seeing that the treatment really, we strive to optimize brain function, but whether it's a firefighter, law enforcement officer, or a veteran, it's pretty agnostic to your profession. It's really just trying to tap into first order principles of physics and our natural neurobiology and optimize function.
Well, let's jump ahead. We'll go back to the kind of, journey into Boeing and everything. But while we're talking about this now, so you've got the EEG, you've got the analysis, and then you've got the TMS. So kind of walk me through, let's say it's a soldier or a firefighter that walks through the front door. What would that look like as far as the what they're actually experiencing in each of these units, and then the kind of timeline that you're seeing?
Sure. So the EEG stands for electroencephalogram. It's a very simple study. It's a neuroimage. Takes about 15 to 30 minutes to acquire. It's painless. You sit in a dark room and they put kind of a cap on your head. And we can see a lot of different things through this capability. EEG went through a pretty quantum change about 15 years ago when it got fully digitized. And we can do very sophisticated discriminant analyses now that we could not do before. So much in the same way an electrocardiogram is an electrophysiologic picture of the heart, these electroencephalograms are electrophysiologic pictures of the brain. Our next step doing these computational analytics, and there's some AI augmentation to this, we can look for disruptions in brain activity and show that to not just physicians and scientists, but also our patients. And it's been very illuminating to see the light go on for many of our patients, whether they're veterans or law enforcement or firefighters or paramedics. Many of them have gotten MRIs and CT scans and told everything looks normal. But when you see a disruption activity, there's this realization that, it's not just my weakness or, it's not a lack of discipline or fortitude. There's a real neurobiological issue that's leading to me struggling. And many of them will say, my healing journey started once I could see that. And it's been impressive to see the kind of behavioral change that can engender. People become their own best advocates and they start, protecting their sleep more. They'll exercise more vigorously. They'll have cleaner diets, which is all, I think, foundational to, this healing and human performance journey. But we don't just rest on natural holistic methods. We can use this transcranial magnetic stimulation device to tune those areas and restore the functional connectivity of the brain networks. And the way that happens is there's a 15-minute session where you sit in a comfortable chair. They place this coil near the area where they see the disruption. And there'll be about a 6 to 10 second pulse train of, it feels like a tapping on your forehead. And that process is entraining brains and neuron activity to become more coherent. And I'll explain that more in a moment, but it's not painful. This is not like electroconvulsive therapy or anything very aggressive. Many of our patients say it feels like a brain massage. The very first pulse, maybe catch you off guard if you're not ready for it. But by the second, third time you do it, it's very comfortable. Does not require any anesthesia or anything like that. It's completely non-invasive. But many of our doctors say, 15 minutes a day for 4 weeks. We're asking for not a lot of time to recover a lot of function. And so that's fundamentally the process. To take a step back in terms of one of the ways we look at the EEG, every one of us has a unique signature. And one of the dimensions we look at is something called the alpha signal. And alpha is the dominant rhythm in your brain, how many times per second your brain can process information. And it's generally between 8 and 13 hertz. And you may have a 12.4 hertz brain, a fast processing brain. Other people may have a slower brain. We find many people who are more creative, maybe a little bit slower in the 9.2, 9.3 range. It doesn't matter. It tends to be just where we're born. But if we see an area of the brain that's misfiring, let's say the prefrontal cortex is at 6 hertz, while the rest of your brain is at 11 hertz, that information mismatch may manifest as certain symptoms to you. And that happens to be one of the more common patterns that we see. If you've had a mechanical injury, like some blunt force trauma to the front, or even an overpressurization blast injury for some veterans, the neuron's stereotypical response to injury is to slow down. And so if we can start to speed those areas up and provide it with the entrainment daily, the body does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. And that kind of taps into how we've been designed as human beings. Whether you believe in Mother Nature or God, we're healing organisms. And if you put 2 ends of a broken bone together, it'll heal, sometimes grow back stronger. If you put 2 ends of a wound margin together, that will also heal. And the brain sometimes just needs a gentle nudge as well. And so we're looking for these areas of disruption, and we're providing a gentle stimulation. It is about a 1.8 Tesla magnetic coil. We provide a much lower intensity than that, obviously. And for those who are academically curious, the reason an MRI grade coil is used, MRIs have a unique property of being able to deliver energy across a solid object. And so rather than having to drill a hole and place kind of an electrode in the brain, we can use these coils. It'll traverse the 1 centimeter piece of skull between you and the outside world, and it can cause an action potential within the neurons that lie underneath. So it's a beautiful capability. I can't say it's absolutely painless, but it's not, in my experience, it wasn't particularly painful or anything like that. It was actually a pleasant sensation. And so we do that for generally 4 weeks. Some people may take longer. Some people can be shorter. It depends on the severity of the injury. And we see pretty significant changes in symptoms.
What are the kind of commonalities that you're seeing in the fire service? Because when I think about the military, especially, obviously, if they are infantry or, some of the other units that are going to be front and center, they're going to be breaching, then, the concussive force is quite obvious. When it comes to law enforcement, again, going hands-on with people, again, firearms training, SWAT breaching, you can see there'd be more of that. But with the fire service, we're exposed to that less. Now, I was a martial artist my whole life, so I've definitely been kicked and punched way more than I probably should have been. But that aside, when I see my profession, I see more damage from the sleep deprivation, from which what I'm told from many people in your world has a similar effect to, the kind of traumatic effect as far as the demyelination of the myelin sheath. So what are you seeing as far as those imbalances in firefighters versus maybe some of the other professions?
Yeah, you touched precisely on maybe the first thing people notice is the restoration of deep restorative sleep. And that is a common finding between the different communities. And it's interesting. I sort of thought of all of these professions as being slightly different, but as I feel very privileged to be able to help these communities, I'm realizing there's so much in common. All of these different communities have raised their hand and said, I'm going to sacrifice and serve my community in this way. And each of them willing to go into harm's way to protect and serve, which is kind of unique. Not a lot of people are willing to do that. But the sleep deprivation, whether it's going overseas, 18 time zones away, and wearing night vision goggles to have a tactical advantage at night. So you're intentionally inducing kind of a sleep deprived state, or whether you're doing shift work in a local community, sleep disruption and circadian rhythm disruption tend to be hallmarks of these professions. And although we tend to think or assume that we will adapt given some time off from a night shift, physiologically, it doesn't happen as quickly or easily as we might hope. So certainly we can walk through all the different sleep hygiene, tactics we can use, whether it's kind of exercise and at the right times or diet, nutrition, blackout curtains, these things. But what this treatment is affording in some ways is a bit of a reboot. And we find when we see disruptions in activity, because chronic sleep deprivation certainly causes slowing in the prefrontal cortex. And if you ever wonder, if I'm sleep deprived, my emotional resilience goes down, my impulsivity goes up, it's not your imagination, right? These are things that we can observe in an EEG with great predictability. And if we can help to restore that activity, number one, you may subjectively feel better, but you're likely going to sleep better as well. So one of the pieces of feedback we frequently hear is, I just had the best night of sleep I've had in 10 years. And those are usually the cases where we know, okay, this is a person who's going to do well. And so yeah, sleep is really foundational. There's second and third order benefits to sleep that are critical in so many different ways. And I've heard in some of your other podcasts, this is covered in great detail, but chronic sleep deprivation predisposes people to cardiovascular disease, cerebrovascular disease, cancer, many different types of conditions. And I believe now, thankfully, there's beginning to be some recognition and proactive movement to try to correct that. Never as fast as we want it to be. But I think the first step is just to acknowledge this is an issue and then work towards finding solutions that can help.
Well, we talked before we hit record because you mentioned about listening to some of the episodes prior, and I was explaining how I'm trying to make an industry standard where we have at least a 72-hour period between shifts. Right now, it's a 48-hour period. What is your perspective with this unique lens that you have on the impact of giving first responders more time between shifts to try and get closer to that baseline?
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant idea to be able to make that change. And what you're proposing, it's actually quite a simple change. And the long-term impact of that, you think about adding an extra 24 hours of rest between shifts over a career, 10, 15, 20 years. The amount of benefit that each individual would gain not only would help the force of the unit, but also the family. You think about how that impacts your time at home, your ability to be present with children and spouses. I think that it would have quite a meaningful, potentially profound impact on both an emotional and a physical level. So I imagine there are logistical challenges with making something like that happen, but I think if there's will to see these changes in service to the community that's serving all of us, it can be done. It's just a matter of recognizing it and probably acquiring some data to demonstrate what those benefits are at a quantitative level.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, we've got sadly, the reverse data where we know what happens if we do it the way we do it at the moment, and it results in a recruitment crisis and, bleeding money through overtime and lack of retention and all these things. So ironically, the data is in the opposite direction, but it's still data. We know this isn't working. Graveyards are full of firefighters and other first responders. But what's exciting is that money is already downstream. So even, financially, you can just kind of front load that, invest in your people. And then, then you've got the capacity to start sending people to all the other areas that can help you level up. And obviously wave neuroscience is one of them. But there's so many areas that we can get from trying to get us not to die all the way to the other side of performance. And I think this is what's become very clear recently when I talk to nutritionists and strength and conditioning coaches and people like yourself.
is when you work with special warfare, you're squeezing out performance. Like you said, you're also trying to mitigate the impact of war on the mental health side, but you're helping these operators perform at the highest level. In my profession, all the conversations are is let's try and get us to die less. So we've got a long way to go from where we are now to the performance conversation, but it's an exciting journey that we can travel, because not only will we improve our longevity and our relationships at home, but we will simply be better paramedics, police officers, and firefighters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Before joining the podcast, I was doing some research on the literature on shift work, really across professions, whether it's hospital workers or firefighters, law enforcement, long haul pilots. Um, and the weight of the evidence is pretty clear that shift work, as it's currently administered, is pretty harmful to health. And so anything we can do to bend that curve, I think would be of great service to these communities. So yeah, I agree. And I think that your effort to spread the knowledge that this is a simple intervention that could help in many different ways, I think it is very smart. And I hope the right people will listen and start to make some of these changes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been people like you, over 1,000 conversations. Not all of them are specifically about shift work, but it's just layers where I always tell people the Venn diagram has overlapped so clearly that there is no denying, because every person from all these walks of life, from neuroscientists to neurosurgery to sports performance to whatever it is, back injury, they all say the same thing. So this is a beautiful thing. If you really get outside your echo chamber and you challenge these concepts and they come back as the truth over and over and over again, then it's hard to then turn your head. Now it's time to acknowledge it and change.
Absolutely. And it's probably worth mentioning too, it was interesting. We had talked before we hit record, some of the work that we were fortunate enough to do with U.S. Special Operations Command. And their feedback was earlier on, we love what you're doing for the men and women who are injured. We actually view a lot of this benefit as being a human performance benefit. And in fact, Air Force Special Operations recently just published the first brain optimization program. And they measured a bunch of different things. Some of the things that were interesting and maybe interesting for your audience, we saw improvements in reaction times, sometimes in the millisecond range, but for firefighter, law enforcement, or a Navy SEAL or an Army Green Beret, that can be very important. We were able to see quantitatively improvements in sleep. And then, there's a number of other things that were measured, force plate data, that is a proxy for injury risk. And it was interesting to have a conversation with some of the doctors in this area. And one of my mentors, I should mention, Stefanos Kales, out of Harvard, most of his research has been on firefighter health. And the question that was raised is, are those benefits completely due to the treatment, or is it a happy byproduct of improving the sleep quality of these individuals? And I think an argument can be made for both. It's really hard to tease out the contribution of one or the other, but I do think something that the whole audience can learn, I think is probably, if it hasn't been learned, can just be reinforced, that sleep is of paramount importance. And if you look at the pillars of health, diet, nutrition being one, exercise activity being a second, but recovery and sleep being the third. Strong argument can be made that recovery is really the foundation for all of this. And we do have to give ourselves the time to heal and to recover, especially if you have a difficult shift. And I really like that 3-day concept rather than 2, because cumulatively over time, the benefit people can get from one extra night of good sleep in a 4-day cycle is quite profound.
Absolutely. I had 2 military sleep researchers on the show, Rachel Marquardt and Alison Brager, and they were talking about not only reaction time when it came to sleep, but also critical thinking, which is incredibly important, to shoot or not to shoot, for example. Or in my profession, the right drug, the right dose, the right, part of the body. And so, yeah, there was a direct correlation between sleep deprivation and poor critical thinking. And you look at a lot of these videos of these police officers, for example, making the wrong decision. No one ever really asks, when did they sleep? Were they forced to do an extra shift? So what was their stress level? So I agree. Even when you look at the performance side, as far as mistakes that we make, there's hardly ever a kind of reverse engineering and sleep deprivation. But if you look at Chernobyl and the naval crash that we had not long ago, and the Exxon Valdez, sleep deprivation is behind not the sole reason, but what's the right word? A massive contributing element when it came to those disasters and the massive dollar amount that came along with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And these things can actually be measured in some creative ways too. We're talking about performance gains, but there's an interesting study that came out of Australia in 2019 where they measured typographical errors made by nurses and shift workers. And there's a dose-response relationship. Like the more sleep deprived you are, the more errors that you make in your typing. And it was statistically significant. And so we can see consciously or unconsciously the number of mistakes that are made increases quite significantly the longer and more chronically you're sleep deprived. So yeah, it's pretty clear based on the data and the evidence.
Well, you mentioned trauma as one of the factors creating that imbalance in the brain. When, again, after all these years of having these conversations, it became very apparent through being educated from a lot of guests how many of us have childhood elements that contributed to trauma later in our career. So aside from the actual physiological trauma, how does it manifest in other ways that you can still see in the EEG if it's more of a kind of psychological traumatic element?
Yeah, it's interesting. As we dug into the science and as the body of evidence has been growing about PTSD, there's a few pretty clear physiologic changes that occur, particularly in the adolescent, pediatric trauma population. We see reductions in what's called hippocampal volume. The size of the hippocampus decreases in size. Very objective. This is not kind of a survey or a questionnaire. It's a measurable difference that we see as these patients grow. The other area that's pretty uncontroversial is we see changes in brain network connectivity. And it's specifically, there's a network that's of interest for the PTS community called the default mode network, or the DMN. So there's some great work being done at Stanford exploring the effectiveness of a similar treatment as fMRI guided for depression. And they're studying the salience network. And I won't bore your audience with a lot of the deep science behind that. It's fascinating to me, but I know boring for many. But the salience network's been closely correlated with depression. And when they treat these areas, the salience network can flip the direction of some of the pathways they call anti-correlation. Depression remits. And so that's been very exciting to see. Our group is very focused on restoring function of the default mode network. And the disruption in this pattern of connectivity, it's not just our data. There's large population-sized epidemiologic studies with N of, hundreds of thousands, where we can see pretty consistently that this area gets disrupted. And part of that pathway and part of the way we're able to strive to restore function is using this treatment to close that circuit and to reactivate neurons that might be firing too slowly. There's a paradigm in medicine, in neuroscience, they call Hebbian learning, that as neurons fire, they wire. And if we're able to induce these neurons to fire at a rate that is consistent with how other areas of the brain are working, we can cause synchronization of activity. That is believed to be one of the elements that allows people to get more restorative sleep. There is a pattern we see in sleep as we get into deeper sleep. Stage 2 sleep, which is the stage prior to REM sleep, there's a phenomenon we call sleep spindles, where there's these synchronous bursts of activity. And that allows you to get into your dream states of sleep. And we're seeing, and we've had some sleep specialists tell us, they're seeing a dramatic increase in the number of sleep spindles when we administer this treatment. And that aligns in the sense that we are trying to restore synchronization of brain activity, or something we call alpha coherence. And if that, we're starting to tease out and pull the curtain back on how are we getting people into more restorative sleep. And this may be one of those modalities. We're doing some more research. We're working with a group out of Virginia Tech called the Fralin Biomedical Institute that is doing full in-lab polysomnograms on patients. And so I think we'll have a better idea of how sleep is changing post-treatment over the next 6 to 12 months.
See, I have no problem getting to sleep, but I find that I'm not getting that deep quality of sleep. I don't wake up feeling rested normally. So I do all the right things. I usually, maybe not the device thing or the TV thing, but I have blue blocking glasses. I have the air down. I have all the lights, muted in the bedroom, and just trying to get that sleep hygiene dialed in. And it works to a point. I sleep, but I wake up normally with my jaws real tight. My neck is tight because I've been clenching the whole night. And I'm sure that's, related to my fire service career, and then probably beyond that. I was in a house fire when I was 4 years old. That that might be one of the reasons I almost died. But so it's interesting because I'm doing the headspace, and there's not a thing that I feel like I need to address that's haunting in any way. So this is why this technology is intriguing to me. Is like, okay, well, outside of all the psychological things, outside of the sleep hygiene, what are other things that maybe are that missing link to help me actually get a better quality of sleep?
Yeah, it's interesting. If it's possible, it would be great to let you demo the technology and see if it might help you to get kind of a longer sleep duration and push you through sort of those periods where you may be kind of waking up. It may be related to cortisol. That's a hard thing to measure throughout the night, but there may be some ways to measure that and see if that might be one of the areas that could be tuned up. But we can talk about it offline, but it would be great, if you could visit one of our centers in either Ohio, Missouri, or Florida. We could certainly let you try the technology, see if that helps you sleep better.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. Well, you mentioned those states. So let's talk about these initiatives. Which one was first, and how did that kind of come about in the first place?
Yeah, so Senator Frank Hoagland was at the time, he's a retired Navy SEAL. He saw what this technology could do for many of the team guys, and he wanted this to be in the state of Ohio. So we worked through a group called JLC Services. There's a great human being, a patriot named Joe Charles, who saw what this technology could do and wanted to operationalize it. So that bill passed around, I want to say, 2020, 2021. And at that time, it was predominantly for veterans. In year two, they added first responders. And they've now, I believe, treated over 1,000 patients. And it's been a great success. And we've been able to create what's called the dashboard, where legislators and many of their stakeholders can actually see in real time how their taxpayer dollars are returning back to the community. And we get 8 gold standard scales measuring depression, post-traumatic stress symptoms. And there were 2 scales added a couple of years ago that have been of great interest, the opioid craving scale and the pen alcohol craving scale. And we saw an interesting signal that this same treatment seemed to be helping to reduce cravings for substance use disorder. And they launched a separate pilot out of 2 inpatient detox centers, Perry Behavioral Health and Meridian Health. And they were able to replicate this data. And so the goal being, in firefighters, law enforcement, veterans, they may identify with different types of issues. The number one cause of patients coming in was performance and then sleep disorder. Whereas in these inpatient addiction centers, their number one cause for coming in was substance use disorder. And so we were able to see these findings again in that community, which was interesting. But the success that was experienced in Ohio prompted legislators in Missouri to replicate that same bill. And so we're very excited. They've had a very successful program as well. Senator Black is leading the effort there. And then Florida came online this year. And actually the legislator that initiated the bill there is actually somebody who was on your podcast, Danny Alvarez, who is himself just an amazing guy. I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend some time with him, and he is the real deal. Like he is, I think, what you would want every senator and politician to be. Like he lives his word and is really doing everything he can to help the community. So yeah, it's been inspiring to see these initiatives move forward and to be able to help these communities and collect more insight into what's happening has been pretty amazing to see. And so I would just mention too, if anyone in your audience is interested, they can go to etmsohio.com or etmsmissouri.com or etmsflorida.com. You can actually enroll. There's a portal on those websites where they could sign up and access the treatment really at no cost to them, thanks to these lawmakers who found it suitable to provide the treatment to those populations.
Beautiful. So those states are actually funding the treatments for these first responders, military, and veterans.
That's right. And paramedics are part of that community as well. It seems like the different centers may have sort of different populations that come into them. But it's been interesting, a tip of the hat to the firefighters and law enforcement folks seem to be more, they don't just get the treatment. They go out and they tell their brothers and sisters that you need to come in and get this. And so it's kind of caught on in a way that's been really beautiful to see, where if they see somebody who is struggling, no longer do they have to say, just suck it up or, it's going to get better. Like there's an opportunity for them. And these were specifically designed, we don't necessarily have to diagnose you. There are many people who are a badge who do not want a diagnosis of major depression or PTSD. And interestingly, our treatment, we don't necessarily look for that label either. We're just trying to find disruptions in connectivity. What, a doctor or therapist may call it, isn't necessarily of primary interest to us. We just want to help people. And sometimes they come in for, gosh, I really just want to get my sleep tuned up. Other people just, they want a performance bump. And we see that in most of our clinics. We see CEOs and CFOs from Fortune 500 companies. We see U.S. Olympians, and we see a lot of elite operators, Navy SEALs, Army Deltas. And so the saying is, you don't have to be sick to want to be well. And so if anyone in those communities is interested in the treatment, I just encourage them to look through those websites. And, there's lots of studies listed there, supported by really good, solid evidence and science. But for us, the encouraging part is, just being able to provide access to communities that otherwise may not have access to it.
One thing that's been apparent is just how diverse the toolbox is for someone who's struggling. It could be physically, mentally. I mean, those are usually interwoven anyway. But it used to be, talk therapy and psychiatric meds were pretty much all you had to choose from. And you hear that a lot from the military members that go through the VA. I mean, sadly, I'm sure there's some great professionals within that service, but a lot of them, probably have a tiny window to see each veteran. And so that tends to be the kind of knee-jerk reaction. But then you actually learn about what's truly out there. I mean, yes, you have all those and EMDR and, all these things that are very effective. And then you have what we're talking about today. And then you have equine and canine therapy. And then you have psychedelics and ketamine and MDMA. And all of a sudden you realize how many tools there are. And so I could see how, for example, using Wave would then kind of bring that kind of temperature down out of the red zone. And now maybe that person is able to open up more with their counselor, or they are able to reflect on, and even maybe which part of their body is actually giving them trouble. So, taking, it's not just, the one size fits all, but taking all of these little pieces and finding out what's best for you. And this seems like such a great, first step. Is like, all right, well, let me get my brain to kind of down regulate and balance, and then let me assess again, and let me see, what else would be a great complement to this treatment.
Absolutely. That is something that we've seen encouragingly in the community, is when people come in for the treatment, many times we'll get an unsolicited call from a cognitive behavioral therapist or a family member that, whatever you're doing, they're able to listen better, they're able to talk better, what we're doing is more effective. And so I think that's a fundamental part of this is we're big believers in, it takes a village. So if you're getting benefit from CBT or group therapy or art therapy, by all means, please continue those things. It's all part of the healing journey. And everyone comes from a different part of, everyone has different risk tolerances. And so we see people who are very aggressive about how they want to treat themselves, and we see people who are very conservative about it. And we're fortunate in that we can really take just about all comers. But there are, so I should mention, there are some preclusions to the treatment. If there's any ferromagnetic metallic shrapnel or other types of forms of metal inside the brain intracranially, that would be an absolute contraindication to treatment. Some people, whether they have a shunt or a surgical clip in their brain, they wouldn't be candidates for treatment. History of seizures can also be a preclusion. It's what they call a relative contraindication. The doctor can do an assessment and decide whether the patient is a candidate for treatment or not. The most common side effect is a transient headache, usually relatively mild, alleviated by over-the-counter ibuprofen or Tylenol. But roughly 15 to 20% of people may experience a headache in the first couple of treatments. Typically, then it goes away. But we always try to be very transparent about any of those risks. We do kind of a full sort of informed consent where everyone who comes in knows what all the risks, side effects, and potential adverse events would be. But compared to many other modalities, such as psychopharma, this has a more desirable safety profile.
Beautiful. Well, I want to circle back to med school, because this has been always an interesting conversation with anyone who's gone through that system. As we are talking now, we're having this 2025 conversation. We're talking about sleep, we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about exercise, we're talking about TMS and all these other therapies. How much of that, obviously not the current technology that you're working with, but when it comes to the holistic human, how much education did you get on that side as you progressed through medical school?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Very little. Yeah. And, I went to med school at a time where it was a bit more barbaric in terms of the type of hours that you worked. So I remember our trauma surgery rotation, and I had to do trauma again before I deployed. The typical schedule, it's not supposed to be this way, but the typical schedule was 36 on, 12 off, 36 on, 12 off. And, we would do that for 2 months. And it's a bit of a crucible in terms of the pressure, because you're literally many times on the cutting edge between life and death for a patient. And you're so sleep deprived. You're really worried about making a mistake. And there's always these stories about the resident who fell asleep driving home and got into an accident. So it is something we should have better understood. I would say sleep science has come such a long way over the last 30 years. It's been interesting to see how it evolves. And, early in my career, I got to meet two of the legendary sleep scientists, William Dement and Christian Gelmano. They started one of the first sleep labs at Stanford. And then my mentor, Stefanos Kales, his dad's name is Anthony Kales, was a preeminent sleep researcher at Penn State University. And I just think about how exciting it must have been to have discovered these sleep stages, how, humans as a species needed the sleep. But yeah, when I was going through, I don't think we really knew too much about sleep and sleep architecture and how important it was to us. And we're right around the same age, but our generation was when kind of bravado when it came to I'll sleep when I'm dead was very much the call. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, sadly, they talked about how well they could function without sleep, and both of them passed away of Alzheimer's disease. Um, so, uh, so yeah, to answer your question, we had almost no coursework on sleep or sleep architecture.
There's a slide that I have on this presentation I do on the 2472. And it's not something I normally talk about. I don't normally present, but I've helped a couple of departments recently, kind of help make the move in their area, hopefully make the move. And there's this one photo, and I says, anyone know who it is? And I can't remember his name now, but it is that the surgeon from about, I think he was like early 1900s or late 1800s, but he was the one that really created up this insane residency week that you were just talking about. And when they dove deeper into who he was a cocaine and heroin addict. So of course he was able to stay up for days on end. But that's really the origin story on the medical side of why these residency weeks were so long. And just like you said, how dangerous in neurosurgery, surgery, and ER to have a woefully sleep deprived physician working under those conditions.
Yeah, it's reflecting back, and they've actually instituted some regulations where that kind of schedule is no longer permitted. And so it's interesting to see the old school, new school type approach where a lot of the doctors who went through that pressure cooker feel like, it's a rite of passage. They should be required to go through that to prove themselves. And I think other more common sense folks realize that that's a very positive thing, that not only are we jeopardizing, the young resident, but patient care can be compromised as well. So I think overall, those changes are real positive. And to your point, about trying to see this change in the firefighter community, it always feels impossible until it's not. And so, sometimes it feels like, are they going to adopt this? Are we going to do the right thing? And I just encourage you and others, because you clearly have the conviction, these things are possible. And if it's serving the community in that way, eventually I think the right thing usually happens, not always. But science converges on the truth. And this is one where I think a pretty simple study could illustrate that quite simply. But it's common sense enough where maybe you don't even need that. And I do hope that change comes about sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I've made that very point. If we need a study to show that 56 hours a week is worse than 42, then, do we need a study for getting hit by a bus is going to hurt? There's certain things that you just don't need a study for. Well, as you touched on, the holistic education, and I've heard this so often from physicians either side of your generation, being such a tiny, tiny part of medical school education. If you were king for a day and you could kind of rewrite the syllabus for our young physicians that are entering schools now, what would you change as far as the kind of proactive, holistic health element of a physician's skill set?
That's a brilliant question. I would require there to be some instruction and study on circadian rhythm and just kind of our natural biology that may be already incorporated. There are 2 Nobel Prizes awarded for the discovery of blue light. And so your audience may already know, but just to walk through it, blue light is 450 to 500 nanometer light that's richest in natural sunlight in the early morning. The reason it's important is when blue light hits your retina, there are specific receptors called melanopsins that activate, and that is your first biological cue to wake up. And so you think about our ancestors thousands of years ago, they didn't have smartphones or tablets or artificial light. Their first biological biological cue to wake up was natural sunlight. So what they call low angle solar light will activate this biological cascade, where when the melanopsins are activated, it sends a message to the suprachiasmatic nucleus and ultimately the pineal gland to release melatonin roughly 14 to 16 hours later. So the first bit of advice would be get blue light in the morning, at least 30 minutes. You can have a bowl of cereal outside. You can walk the dog outside, whatever you need to do, just be outside without sunglasses. Throughout the day, just common sense, limit your caffeine until maybe lunchtime. One bit of data that I found interesting is there's some research that's suggesting there's a ceiling effect to caffeine at right around 200 milligrams. And you can titrate that throughout the day, but I see some of these energy drinks with like 300 milligrams of caffeine. It's just overkill. You really don't need that amount. And there's some variants, like if you're a larger person, you may need a little bit more, but just to be sensible about stimulant and caffeine intake. Last meal should be around 6 or 7 p.m., ideally without too much sugar. And then you begin the wind down process. This is the part that's tricky for people. I'm guilty of it. It's very hard to put away your phone and to put away your work, but your body needs a ramp down period. Cool, dark environment for sleep. And the ideal time to sleep for most people is between 9 and 10 p.m. And there's some people who will say, I'm a night owl. And there are some people, there's different chronotypes, there's no doubt. But for the vast majority of people, they will get the deepest, most restorative sleep between 9 and 10 p.m. And that is the closed loop that starts in the morning with a blue light exposure. There will be about a 30 to 40 minute window of evening somnolence where you start to feel very tired, usually signaled by a deep yawn. That should be your biological cue that I need to go to bed. And if you go to bed within that window where your melatonin is spiking, based on the biological cue of having blue light exposure in the morning, you should get deep restorative sleep. Hopefully your cortisol levels will remain low and you'll be able to sleep through the night. And doesn't always happen. You know, in the 5th and 6th decade, the prostate starts to enlarge, something we call benign prostatic hypertrophy for men. Many times people have to get up at night to use the bathroom. So we recommend don't overhydrate kind of right before sleep. There are some good interventions for that. But fundamentally, if I, could construct the curriculum for medical school, I would say that's a critical piece everyone should know. And just one more anecdote I would share. There was a subway stop in Tokyo that sadly many people were committing suicide on. And they actually installed blue lights in that particular subway station. And almost miraculously, they saw those suicide rates go down within the first month. There's a publication on this, and we don't always get that blue light exposure as we should. And I'll admit for myself, I was going because windows actually filter out blue light. And for myself, I'd go from my bedroom in an enclosed space into my garage, into a car where I'm getting enclosed glass. And I walk about 10 feet into my office. And I was getting no blue light exposure. And it wasn't a surprise that my sleep was terrible. And once I learned these simple things, these are simple, free, available to everyone types of techniques that can really encourage better sleep quality. And that's the type of thing I think everyone should know.
Absolutely. I actually had Professor Russell Foster on the show. He ironically had worked with my dad. My dad's a veterinary surgeon, retired, but they had crossed paths in, I think it was King's College, one of those colleges in London. And he was actually the one who found the chronoreceptors in the first place. And it's so interesting because, again, as I sit here getting a lot of resistance from my profession and trying to make proactive changes, he was laughed at by the ophthalmology careers for suggesting there was another receptor. They had rods, they had cones, that was it. But it's a real kind of disruptor story because he ended up proving it on rats, and now it's all we hear about is when you wake up, get daylight on your eyes, reset your chrono rhythm, and so still relying on the way we did it, as you touched on, 30, 40, 50 years ago, is insanity when you see technology and you watch science constantly evolving. We can't stay stuck back then because we understand things completely differently now. So, a 2025 medical school, I would hope, would be talking about sleep and nutrition and exercise and the importance of community and some of these things outside of pharmacology that I think would forge a lot more physical and mental health in this country.
Absolutely. Yeah, one other similar discovery to that. We used to believe the deeper stages of sleep, when brainwaves slow down, was just a time for these neurons to restore their energy. Adenosine diphosphate and monophosphate would rephosphorylate, and you get ATP again. But it turns out there's a much more important activity that's happening that we didn't even know about until probably about a decade ago. And there was a researcher named Makin Nedergaard who used a technique called two-photon microscopy, where they could look at neurons in real time. And there's structural scaffolding in the brain that was thought to be just a support structure and not really have any type of activity. They're called glial cells. And what she discovered was that during the deep stages of sleep, the structural scaffolding would change, and it would contract and open up wide channels in the brain that would allow cerebrospinal fluid to rush through and wash away the metabolic oxidative stress that accumulates throughout the day. So it's functionally, many people call this the sanitation system. It's called the glymphatic system. And there's a separate study that was done where, and we probably would not be able to do these studies anymore, because they actually sleep deprived patients for a night or two, and they would lumbar puncture them, and they'd measure the amount of kind of metabolites in the cerebral spinal fluid. And what they found was, even after just one night of sleep deprivation, they find increased concentrations of tau proteins and beta amyloid. And if those sound familiar, those are the proteins that phosphorylate in your brain and can lead to cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. They're called neurofibrillatory tangles. And there's now emerging evidence that sleep may be one of the causal agents, specifically sleep deprivation, that may lead to cognitive decline. And so if the audience didn't have enough of a reason to want to protect their sleep from, a performance and, kind of health and energy and longevity perspective, cognitive decline in Alzheimer's really strikes fear into a lot of people. And if this is a simple step that can be taken to ward off those effects and the accumulation of these proteins, that should provide some extra incentive and motivation. And on the other side of that, I don't want the audience to walk away in fear that one night sleep deprivation is going to cause them to get very sick. It's not like that. But chronically over years, this can be a concern.
It's interesting because one of my guests pointed out a while ago, he was like, if you truly wanted to do a study that actually replicates a firefighter's shift in 2025, which would be, again, 24 hours with no sleep or disrupted sleep, a 48-hour period, but every week or two would be a forced overtime. So that would be a 48-hour period with no sleep. He said ethically, no college would allow that. No research facility would allow you to provide sleep deprivation to the subjects for that amount of time. So when people say, well, where's the data? It's like, well, if you actually look at it, I don't think any ethics committee would allow you to even do that study in the first place, just like you pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think, as you mentioned earlier, science is not sort of a static process. It's always evolving. We're always learning more. Some old paradigms end up being incorrect. And we have to move in the direction of, what is the arc of truth and where is it leading us? And so that's where, some of these discoveries of, brain function and neuroscience should alter the way in real time of how we conduct our daily lives. And part of that is the information transfer from the lab and from research into kind of wider audiences like this. And so, so I think it's important to both understand that and to track it and follow it, because things we held on to as truth 10, 20 years ago are no longer valid. It's been a fascinating process to watch and observe.
When you talk about, for example, cardiovascular disease and inflammation, if you talk about diabetes, again, old school it was irreversible. Now we know that many cases, if you change, your diet, if you change your exercise level, your stress levels, that we can reverse a lot of these. What about the neurodegeneration side? Is the brain given, a good environment now, good hydration, good exercise, good nutrition, and solid sleep? Are you seeing reverse of damage in some of these neurodegenerative diseases?
That's a great question. I don't think we know the answer to that yet. I think there's some studies that are being either planned or launched that will give us some answers, but that's going to be a bit down the road. In particular, I'm aware of there being some initiatives in the Department of Defense where they're looking at medical devices that may encourage activity of the lymphatic system that we're talking about to encourage clearance of some of the metabolic debris that's accumulated throughout the day. So I think this knowledge base, as we learn new things, interventions can be innovated to try to help the long-term health of all these different communities. So the goal, of course, would be to be able to either arrest or reverse neurodegenerative disease. I'm not aware of there being that intervention at the moment, but given the option, of course, we would encourage people, if we believe sleep may be one of the causal agents of cognitive decline, it then follows that protecting your sleep and making sure you're getting good restorative sleep may have some preventative capabilities.
Absolutely. I mean, one would think that if you were able to get that glial activity during a deep sleep and you haven't got that deep sleep. So for example, you take fire service right now and they're working these shorter rest periods, the 48 hours, and they're getting forced to work more. And now we progress to a 72-hour period and a fully staffed fire service because now people are coming back. I would assume that that's more baths for their brain. And so maybe every good solid night's sleep using Wave and all these other tools that we've talked about, there's an opportunity for that brain to slowly start taking out some of that trash that's been left there from our career before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, you're talking about a 33% improvement in sleep quantity. What's harder to measure that third day, I'd be willing to bet the sleep quality will also be significantly better. It takes some time to sort of restore function after you've had, pull an all-nighter or are significantly sleep deprived. So yeah, I think there'd be multiple levels of benefit there.
One more area that I want to revisit, Wave, before we kind of go to some closing questions. I've heard Alzheimer's referred to type 3 diabetes many times now. And so if we're talking about an opportunity to hopefully either minimize further damage or even reverse disease, that seems to be another one that we can get to. The Parkinson's side sounds like it's more trauma and chemical insults. But what have you learned as far as diet and Alzheimer's specifically?
Yeah, and this is another area of the science that's rapidly emerging. Insulin sensitivity clearly has a role to play in global health, overall health. It can be a profoundly inflammatory issue, and it sort of compounds upon itself where you can have more adiposity, like increased belly fat, which is itself inflammatory and cortisol-inducing. So part of, I think, the strategies that are going to be interesting, especially when it comes to diabetes, and even this area, it's emerging as a controversial area, but these GLP-1s, Ozempic, Zepbound, Mounjaro, semaglutide, they're very good at improving, weight loss. The controversial area was it seemed that it was not predominantly fat loss. We also saw some lean muscle mass diminishing as weight was going down. And the current advice is to, number one, increase your protein intake on these GLP-1s, but also to increase resistance training and weightlifting. For your audience, that's probably built into their DNA. There's probably a fair amount of resistance training. I know you're carrying, these heavy dummies and doing very physical activity. But there's a next generation GLP coming out that looks really interesting called retatrutide that appears to preserve lean muscle mass in a different way than the two earlier generations of the medication. So I'm not a GLP-1 evangelist. I think it definitely has a place, particularly for type 2 diabetes. A lot of the studies are very encouraging in terms of being able to reverse type 2 diabetes. And I've seen a few cases, people that I know well, one in particular I'm thinking lost 100 pounds. And completely dramatic shift for this individual where he's able to enjoy life in a different way than he could have just a year and a half ago. And so I'm neither a proponent or, enemy of GLPs. I think they just need to be used responsibly. And I think that with proper supervision and coaching, they can be very powerful adjuncts to other more holistic methods. I will say one thing that's interesting is listening to some of these exercise, athletic, fitness podcasts. It seems to really be proliferating the bodybuilding world, which was not something I'd anticipate. But it does make sense if somebody is entering a cutting phase to be able to reduce their appetite would make sense. But again, this, to our earlier discussion, it's a rapidly evolving area of science. And I think how that plays out is still to be seen.
I had Johan Hari on the show. He wrote a book about that. And to me, one of the most exciting applications is obesity, like true obesity, because I've lost 2 friends to gastric bypass. And, again, with the answer, obviously, ideally is diet and exercise, and clearly some mental health work too, because I think behind every person who's truly struggling physically, there's going to be a kind of origin story in their timeline as well. So we miss that piece a lot of times, the psychological piece. But if you are already at that point and you are going to have, parts of your digestive system clamped and cut, or you can take, an Ozempic-like drug for a while, I think that's a much healthier alternative for that population. Do I think that bodybuilders should be using it? I mean, we keep losing influencers at the moment, fitness influencers, and I'm sure, that's probably behind a lot of that too. So like every drug, it can be abused. But just to underline what you said, I think there is an application for certain populations that it can just get them back to a more healthy state. And then hopefully then that will allow them to actually take a deeper dive into their nutrition and their fitness. And that will then allow them to sustain and come off these drugs.
Yeah, it's interesting to see sort of these off-label uses of different compounds. We haven't even talked about peptides yet, and I know that's its own area of interest and controversy. But the GLP-1s, I think, to have something that's genuinely effective for obesity, I think is really encouraging, and certainly compared to a surgical intervention like a gastric bypass, much safer. Not without any side effects. There are, nausea is pretty common. There is what's called gastric paresis, where your stomach can stop moving the bowels. But my experience has been that's a relatively rare side effect. So compared to, an invasive surgical intervention, although these can be minimally invasive now, they can be done endoscopically. I think the GLP-1s are a great option to consider before moving into something more aggressive like that.
What is your perspective of peptides? I was taking, I'm still taking one at the moment, eclomiphene, which helps your body make a little bit more of its own testosterone. I think I've said this a lot on the show. The old school, again, mentality was if you were within that range, then you were fine. And you had 30-year-old tactical athletes being told that their testosterone being at 251 was perfectly within normal limits. Now we know that's not the case. But then I think the pendulum swung the other way, where all these men's clinics are opening up and they're giving young firefighters TRT, not educating them on the fact that they're going to have all these side effects and they're going to be on it the rest of their life. So I think peptides are a good happy medium for this population when it comes to that. I know you've got dihexa, which is supposed to be a good nootropic. What is your perception, without loading the question, what is your perception of the world of peptides that we're seeing now?
It's a great question. I should preface this by saying I don't know a lot about peptides. I haven't prescribed them or used them. But I find myself having to be somewhat knowledgeable because so many of my patients come into the discussion using these, and they'll ask me, is it safe to proceed, whether it's enclomiphene or BPC 157, or I'm having to learn these acronyms. SLUPP 332, I think, is a new one. It's supposed to be a good anti-inflammatory. And so I don't have enough background on the science, certainly to recommend or endorse them, but I see them enough, and people have told me enough that, at least anecdotally, they seem to hold some promise without as many of the side effects that may be common with other interventions. But my encouragement is always wait until there's more data. I recognize I'm probably more risk averse than others, but I still like to see hard science and empirical evidence before recommending a lot of these things. But I've seen these become much more common and ubiquitous, particularly in like the high performance world. I'm seeing a lot of people using these. So yeah, it's certainly a rapidly emerging area, and I'd be interested. It sounds like a pretty good response on the enclomiphene.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because they gave me a bunch, and I naturally had at 50 or almost 50, I had a testosterone of around 700 after all that shift work, which is, but I just felt, very drained. And I was like, well, if that's after 14 years of not sleeping, because I did the 24/72 for most of my career, I had the mandatory overtime. Can I take a little tweak? Well, what they gave me, I'm sure, was probably more for the person with the 300, and so I went through the roof, and my nipples hurt, and I started crying, and I'm like, okay, this is too much. So I've been tapering off ever since, and the clomiphene has been good, but again, I just had my bloods taken, and I'm on, the lowest dose I've got just to the single peptide, and again, my testosterone was like 1,000. I'm like, okay, this is still probably too much. So now I'm in the process of actually coming off everything, because this is my whole thing. It's like a bolus might be good for a while to help you kind of get back on your feet, just like maybe the Ozempic is for someone. But then how can you sustain without any of it? Because your body is a miracle, and it should be able to perform at a high level. But now I'm not on shift, and I'm doing a lot of things right. So this is always my ethos, whether you're on blood pressure medication or a peptide. Is there an exit strategy? It's getting you to a certain point, but then when are you going to come off? Are you going to take this to the rest of your life? And I don't think that is the right answer. So I think for me, as a crutch, when you're in a hole, then absolutely, I think they're fantastic. But, for example, the anti-inflammatories, all right, you've got the pain to stop hurting in your joint. Well, now what are you doing to PT it? What are you doing to reduce the inflammation? So you don't need to take BPC 157 the rest of your life either. So I think just, again, it's that if there's an application, but, the further you get away from the holistic way that man has existed for the longest time and thrived on this planet, I think, you got to ask yourself, why do you need this pill, this potion, the rest of your life? So that's kind of my philosophy. I've kind of self-experimented. I've titrated to effect, and that effect is literally, now it's like going to be zero. I'm like every other day, and I'm going to be off it probably in a couple of weeks. So it'll be interesting to see. But it's had a great effect up to this point. But you got to be careful, because too much is bad too.
No, that's brilliant. Especially, I like your comment about there should be an exit strategy, and I think that's probably where the GLP-1s will emerge. And I think the paradigm that I'm seeing more and more, and this particular case I was talking about that lost 100 pounds, part of the goal should not just be, a principal goal, of course, is to maintain, insulin sensitivity and hopefully reverse some of the type 2 diabetes. But if the goal is weight loss, I would try to reframe that discussion as being something along the lines of changing body composition. Because if you're reducing, let's just say somebody starts with a body fat percent of 28%, If you can get that below 20%, there's a concordant increase in basal metabolic rate where they can maintain that weight loss and do it in a healthy, naturalistic way and not take GLP-1s indefinitely. Where I start to get worried is when people enter, particularly as it relates to TRT, a scenario where they may not realize it's indefinite consumption. Because TRT unopposed over a long period of time can cause destruction of the endogenous production of testosterone, and you end up needing that long term. My understanding is enclomiphene is the opposite effect of that, is you do maintain your natural production of testosterone, so a much safer and natural way of approaching it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I found myself. All right. Well, then let's go back to WAVE. So just kind of underline, if someone listening wants to find a place to experience this themselves, what is the best way? And then also, if someone's in a state other than Missouri, Ohio, and Florida, what moves can they make to try and get this a statewide initiative in their home?
Yeah, so the websites that I mentioned, etmsohio.com, etmsflorida.com, and etmsmissouri.com, are probably the easiest way to engage those initiatives. And you should get a call within 24 hours typically. We also have other clinics around the country. If you look up, I believe, braintreatmentcenter.com/locations, it'll give you a list of, we have over 100 centers nationwide. And those centers can certainly take you in, get an EEG, and get you started on all of this. If there are other people who are interested in just standard TMS, it's more of a one-size-fits-all approach without the EEG. Those are locations too. You can really just do an internet search and find some of those locations. It's become a fairly common mainstream procedure. So they can look into all those different access points and clinics. Many people will focus on the quality of the doctor at the different sites. I've been impressed with the quality of the physicians who are going into the space. Many psychiatrists, others kind of functional medicine doctors or primary care doctors. But generally speaking, we've seen pretty good quality of medical care being delivered through these different locations.
Beautiful. And then what about if someone wants to try and get it as a statewide initiative? How would you suggest they go about it? Have you heard of how Florida, Ohio, and Missouri made it happen?
There's quite a process to go through. And so I don't know that it happens simply, but in the cases that I've seen, usually there are a handful of people who are lobbying the state to provide access to this treatment. There should be a handful of legislators who want to carry the flag and provide access to the treatment. You can either go through a bill process or a direct appropriation. It is lengthy. This is not a quick cycle, usually over months and years rather than weeks. But for us, part of our goal and objective is to help as many people as possible. When I saw what this could do for my friends and the people that I deployed with, it reminds us of all the good reasons we go into medicine, right? I haven't seen something that could really move the needle in terms of how somebody felt and how they were engaging with their communities and society, quite like I saw with this treatment. And that's part of why I joined the cause is, for the people who are struggling and don't have good interventions available, this can be life-changing. And so, in the military community, we talk a lot about mission and purpose, and this really checked the box in terms of that. So I can share lots of stories about, people who benefited from the treatment, but ultimately I know data speaks the loudest. And so we're engaging in all kinds of clinical trials, both looking at this treatment versus sham placebo. And there's another study that was funded by Special Operations Care Fund and Tomahawk Charitable Solutions, where some veterans were getting, they called the trifecta study, where some veterans were getting hormone management through a functional medicine specialist. And then they would either come to our center in San Diego to get our treatment, or they'd go to Mexico to get a ibogaine 5-MeO DMT session, and then they would come to our center in San Diego and get treatment. And the goal of this study was to see whether it was preferred to get the psychedelic session before or after our treatment. And so we're still blind to that data. I don't have the answers yet. But I think perhaps one thing to mention is this is a pretty unique time in history where there's so much emerging science that should give vulnerable communities hope that there's going to be really meaningful interventions coming on the horizon. And what we've seen initially from this trifecta study, the feedback has been, this is not a case of 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. These people are saying it's like an 8 or a 10. And they really feel like this kind of stacked therapy where you're combining modalities may be the future. And I think there's a lot of science to do before we can endorse or recommend one or the other. But it's encouraging to see some of these studies starting to happen. I just returned from a trip from UT Austin and met with some brilliant scientists. Greg Fonzo and Chuck Nemiroff were talking about some of the studies being conducted there, where they're doing a TMS psilocybin study. And again, the data is very early, but it's encouraging to see this kind of science starting to emerge. So if there are people out there who feel like there's no hope or that nothing is working, my encouragement would be just wait. I think that the next decade is going to be just a fascinating time where new therapeutics are going to get their FDA clearances, and there'll be new interventions that can really help in a profound and meaningful way.
Well, it's so beautiful because we've talked about, evolving with the science, but there's also, at least this is my personal opinion, there's been a lot of arrogance in science and medicine when you reflect on certain areas. And sadly, some of that obviously is coming from, professions that make a lot of money on the stasis, the way it is with chronic disease. But now you look at this kind of revisiting of ancient, medicine and plant medicine and, therapeutics, and now it's marrying. So you've got, as you said, psilocybin and TMS side by side now. And I think this is this beautiful kind of full circle that we're coming. Of course, medicine is incredible, and as people always point out, yes, I would like anesthesia, please, and I would like a sharp scalpel. So I'm all for modern technology, but when you bring that in with, the holistic, not only proactive solutions to obesity and some of these other things, but the plant medicines and some of these other therapeutics that have been shown to work for a long time. I'm seeing a lot more leaning back into Chinese medicine and herbs and all kinds of things. So the marriage of modern technology with the humility of still acknowledging the wisdom of our forefathers, I think, is the superpower that we're going to see, as you said, the next few decades.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see that area emerge. And I have to admit, I'm by no means an expert on psychedelics. We're involved in this one study, but trying to learn about them, we can make sense of certain neuronal circuits and restoring brain function with electrophysiologic interventions. But many of these operators who are coming back talk about something very different, rather than, in the science world, we can talk about the default mode network. We can talk about the 5-HT2A receptor and GABA receptors when we talk about some of these psychedelic compounds. But the manifestation of that, the phenotypic expression of patients who are coming back, I hear repeatedly that they feel the ability to love again, or they feel the ability to have self-love again, or so they classify these empathogens and theogens. Some people will find their faith and belief in God again. And that's something that's very hard to explain with hard neuroscience. It's just something that sometimes you take a step back and you have to feel a sense of wonder and awe at the types of therapeutics that are starting to emerge, and that these existed for 100 years and that we didn't have access to them. There's a whole separate conversation we could talk for hours about, about the journey of many of these compounds. And I think back to I had the good fortune of meeting Rick Doblin, who's the founder of this MAPS institution. They were doing MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. They met the primary endpoint, but sadly, they didn't get their FDA clearance. That made me very sad for humanity. Looking at some of the critique, there were some valid criticisms of the trial design, but I don't think that's going to stop the wave of therapeutics that are coming through. There's a trial called the COMPASS trial that's looking at psilocybin. I'm seeing a lot of really promising data with both psilocybin, ibogaine, and ayahuasca. The only current psychedelic that's available is ketamine. And I've talked to a number of people who had really good benefit from that as well. But this sort of plant-based therapeutic, the emergence of these class of compounds, I think is really exciting. And to your point, I think that many people who get entrenched in a certain way of practicing medicine can be very resistant to innovation. And I sort of view things a different way. Like if we're really in service to our patients, we have to be open-minded to the evolution of science. And ultimately, there's going to be winners and losers. It's just a nature of, academically rigorous science and this endeavor. But for humanity and for these markets, there are going to be winners. And so that's what makes me excited to see not just what is coming, but how the different combination of modalities might be effective.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to be mindful of your time, so I'm going to throw some quick questions at you, if that's okay. Quick closing questions.
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. All right. The first one I'd love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
It's a great question. It's just a book that I've read recently called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. And it's really a little bit about the military, well, a lot about the military experience, but how, being in a highly effective unit in the military and then coming back, this is your tribe, and then coming back to a society in America that maybe is a bit divided, has led to, a lot of, once you leave that unit and you're a bit more isolated, to not have the camaraderie of that tribe can lead to a lot of mental health challenges. So I strongly recommend the book. I'm not doing it justice, but that's an excellent book. One of my favorites is dated now, but there's a book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck, where he talks about the psychology. Just really kind of, there's building blocks where, he talks about the first building block for our human experience is discipline. And through discipline, we can achieve so many things. And kind of it ends with love and spirituality, that through discipline, we can both love ourselves, but love others. And then the spirituality piece kind of comes after. But I bought that book for, probably 100 different people because I think that it's very well expressed. So, but those are the two books that really come to mind.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can't agree more about Tribe, especially. I've had Sebastian on 4 or 5 times now. I mean, when I read Tribe, I was like, this is what we all struggle with in uniform, understanding that cohesion that you have when you are, in this kind of selfless unit. And then, you find yourself on the outside, whether you're fired, retired, whatever the story was, and why you feel this suffering. Because, as a species, we're a tribal species, and that meant death in ancient tribes. So understanding that you can have other tribes outside of what you do and not to put your entire identity into this particular calling, I think is, again, a lesson that we need to be taught day one.
Absolutely.
All right. What about films and or documentaries?
Oh, boy. It's been a while since I watched a film or a documentary for that matter. Gosh, I don't want to leave a question unanswered. I'm just kind of drawing a blank at the moment.
No, that's okay. Well, let me ask you a question. Have you seen that show? It's called The Pit. It's on HBO Max at the moment.
I have not.
Okay, so it's actually one of the actors from ER, the old show, but it's a very, very well written, well acted, very gritty ER show. So very different than the other one. But every episode is an hour in the ER. And so it's incredibly well done. The technical advisors they've had are absolutely amazing. So I always tell people if they haven't heard of it and they're in the medical field that it's definitely worth watching, because I haven't seen a show like that before. And from a technical point of view, they're, as close as they can be. Obviously, compressions on a live person in one scene, they can't be just crushing the chest. But aside from that, it's very well done.
Oh, great. I'm going to have to go and watch that. You got me very interested now.
All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Ooh, that's a great question. There's actually, when I was coming on, I was thinking there are probably quite a few. One of my mentors, Stephanos Kales, I think would be a great one. He's a Harvard professor who spent a career researching firefighter health. And he's a brilliant guy and a wonderful human being. I think that he'd be a good guy to have on the podcast. I didn't look through all of your episodes, but just, we talked about sleep a lot. Matthew Walker, I think, is a brilliant guy to have on the podcast. He spent his career researching sleep. And I would say is one of the real thought leaders in the space. So he's another one that would come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of pseudo-connected with him through one of my mutual friends a while ago, and I think he's become quite busy at the moment. But that was a few months ago, so I need to circle around and see if I can bring his attention again. Because, I mean, that book obviously is the one, when you mention sleep, Why We Sleep is the one that most people think of.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, then the last question before we make sure everyone knows where to find you, what do you do to decompress?
That's a good question. I still enjoy running. I'm not as efficient as I used to be in terms of kind of my times and whatnot. I enjoy exercise. I've tried to take up swimming. Swimming has always been a weakness of mine. Even in flight school, where you have to do survival swimming, you have to tread water in boots and a flight suit. I almost drowned when I was doing that, but I've tried to get better at swimming. I have a friend, Rich Hoagland, who's kind of given me some tips on how to become a better swimmer. So I've tried to take that up. For me, most of my leisure time, I try to dedicate to my kids. I have a beautiful wife and 5 amazing children, 2 who are in college now, 3 who are at home. And so a lot of my time is spent, watching them play soccer, or, my number 4, her name's Emma. She's a ballet dancer. So some of my time is spent watching her competitions. But when you asked me about a documentary or movie, I felt very sad that I haven't really indulged in a lot of that lately. But maybe I take some solace in that I'm investing a lot of time in my kids and my family.
I'd say so. Absolutely. Yeah, more value from that. You can always watch movies when they've left the home. All right. Well, then the very last question then, where are the best places to connect with you, learn more about you?
So Wave Neuroscience we both have our website, waveneuro.com, waveneuro.com. You can find many of our publications in the National Library of Medicine. And if people are interested in those eTMS initiatives, you can find their websites as well. And I can send you that, and maybe it can be in the show notes. I am on LinkedIn if people want to reach out, and we can connect that way as well. Those are the predominant ways. I think Wave Neuro also has a presence on Instagram and what used to be Twitter, X. There's lots of different ways where people can learn and take a bit of a deeper dive into what we do.
Beautiful. Well, I want to say thank you. Firstly, thank you to John for facilitating this in the first place. And it's funny, I found you on LinkedIn and sent you a connection, but some of the mutual friends, there's Brant McCarthy, who lost his brother to suicide. He has a nonprofit now. There's Brian Hillard, who's a friend of mine that I'm working with to make my latest book into a film. So it's funny how these circles overlap. But it's been such an amazing conversation. I mean, your background and your military service, and then all these comparisons as far as, what you're seeing in the special forces and what you're seeing in first responders, and just that hope, as you touched on, the ability to tell people, you haven't tried this may well make a difference in your journey, I think is imperative. And I'm sure the people listening in those 3 states are really excited now, knowing that they can sign up and get this from, for little to no money at all. So I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Absolutely. Really, the pleasure was mine. And it's an honor to be able to spend the time with you. Thank you so much.